In December 1944, deep beneath the frozen soil of Germany, a group of elite engineers sat in a candlelit bunker, finalizing the blueprints for the most ambitious weapon in human history. It was called the Landkreuzer Petentrans. 1,000 Rata. It wasn't a tank, it was a 1,000-ton land battleship. It was so massive it required its own railway system just to move, and its main guns were salvaged from actual battleships. But outside that bunker, the world was screaming. The Eastern Front had collapsed. The Luftwaffe was out of fuel. German cities were being turned to ash by Allied bombers. And most importantly, German soldiers were literally freezing to death because the state couldn't afford to give them winter boots. At that moment, the Third Reich was a plane in a terminal dive. Every instrument on the dashboard was screaming, "Pull up." Every economic model said, "Build rifles, build boots, build simple tanks." Instead, the Reich poured billions into a spaceship, while its soldiers didn't have shoes. This isn't just a story of war. It's a story of the sunk cost fallacy, the most dangerous glitch in human psychology, and how it turned the most advanced military on Earth into a suicide cult. To understand how an entire empire could ignore the laws of physics and arithmetic, you have to understand spatial disorientation. In 2004, Flash Airlines Flight 604 crashed into the Red Sea. The pilot entered a steep bank, but his inner ear lied to him. His gut told him the plane was level, even as his instruments screamed that he was rolling toward his death. He trusted his vision over the data. In 1943, the Reich Chancellery was the cockpit of a crashing empire. The instruments were the production reports. Soviet tank production was outstripping Germany 5-1. American factories were rolling out a bomber every hour. The data was clear. The war was mathematically over. But the pilot Adolf Hitler didn't believe the instruments. He had experienced lucky landings in 1940, where audacity and blitzkrieg had rewritten the rules. He believed his intuition was a superpower that could override economics. He believed that if he just built one miracle weapon, one Wunderwaffe, the wings of the Reich would level out. The V-2 rocket program is the ultimate outlier of military waste. It consumed resources equivalent to the American Manhattan Project. Each V-2 cost 100,000 Reichsmarks. It was the world's first ballistic missile, a technological masterpiece that reached the edge of space and hit London at 3,500 miles per hour. But here is the mathematics of insanity. Each V-2 required 13 tons of potatoes to distill the ethanol fuel. In a nation where the population was starving, the Reich was literally burning the dinner of its citizens to launch a rocket that carried a 1-ton warhead. A single B-17 bomber could drop 8 times that weight, be reused 1,000 times, and cost less to build. The cost per kill ratio of a V-2 was 2,000 Reichsmarks per casualty. A conventional artillery shell? 25 Reichsmarks. They were spending 80 times more to achieve a worse military result. Why did they keep doing it? Because by 1944, they had already spent millions. To stop now was to admit the money was wasted. The sunk cost fallacy had them in a death grip. Every new rocket wasn't an investment in victory. It was a desperate attempt to justify the failure of the last one. In aviation, we talk about the authority gradient. If a junior pilot is too afraid to tell the captain he's making a mistake, the cockpit becomes a tomb. The Third Reich had an authority gradient that was essentially a vertical cliff. Hitler, a man with zero technical training, was the captain. Below him, men like Albert Speer and General Heinz Guderian knew the math. Guderian begged for more Panzer IVs. Simple, reliable tanks. He knew the experimental Maus, a 108-ton tank that was too heavy for any bridge in Europe, was a joke. But in a terror state, dissent is treason. The engineers who knew the 1,000-ton Rata would sink into any soil softer than concrete stayed silent. The instruments were irrelevant. The captain's vision was the only truth. Disasters usually start with lucky landings. When a pilot makes a dangerous mistake but survives, his brain records it as a success. The Blitzkrieg victories of 1940 were the Reich's lucky landings. They convinced the leadership that willpower could defeat logistics. This is why, even as oil refineries were being bombed into rubble, they built the Me-163 Comet. The Comet was a rocket-powered interceptor that was generations ahead of its time. But it was a chemical nightmare. Its fuel was so corrosive it would dissolve a pilot's skin on contact. It had 7 minutes of fuel. 7 minutes. It shot down 9 Allied planes in the entire war. Meanwhile, it killed dozens of its own pilots in takeoff and landing accidents. But the Reich couldn't kill the program. To kill the Comet was to kill the myth of German technological invincibility. The final impact of this delusion was a sound Londoners heard on September 8, 1944, a double thunderclap. The V-2 had arrived. It was a miracle of science, but a catastrophe of strategy. The production of the V-2 conducted in underground slave labor camps killed an estimated 12,000 people. The rockets themselves killed 9,000. The V2 program killed more people on the German side than it did on the Allied side. If the Reich had taken the resources used for those 3,000 rockets and built conventional fighters instead, they could have added 24,000 aircraft to their air defense. That would have changed the war. But the pull-up warning was ignored. They kept the control wheel pushed down, doubling down on miracles while the infantry was barefoot in the snow. Modern industry lives by a rule the Nazis ignored. Fail fast. If it doesn't work, cut your losses. Don't throw good money after bad. The aviation industry learned this through blood, developing crew resource management where data overrides status. But the Third Reich was a system where status overrode gravity. The Tiger II, the Maas, the Schwerer Gustav railway gun. These weren't weapons, they were monuments to a psychological glitch. They proved that when a system is built on an infallible leader, the sunk cost fallacy becomes a terminal disease. In the end, the miracle weapons didn't save the Reich. They just ensured that when the crash happened, it would be the most expensive disaster in human history. They were trying to build a spaceship while they didn't have enough shoes. And in war, the man with the boots always beats the man with the blueprint for a 1,000-ton tank. If the story of the billion-dollar suicide changed how you see the history of Wei, hit the like button. It tells the algorithm that the truth behind the propaganda matters. Subscribe and turn on notifications. We decode the most incredible military outliers every single week.